Now you are okay if it continues like that?
Okay. Um, sauti yangu ikibreak mtaniambia. So we'll begin. Carbohydrates, as Jen has said, I'll be writing on my screen. So we have carbohydrates, and most people call carbohydrates carbs. And carbohydrates are essentially just food articles, foods that are made up of sugars, foods that largely have sugars. So in our class of carbohydrates, we'll be talking about sugars. We'll be talking about, she also said starches. We'll be talking about starches. And then finally, we'll talk about fibers. We'll talk about fibers. I believe that's clear. So this is what carbohydrates are: sugars, starches, and fibers. That is carbohydrates. And this particular nutrient called carbohydrate, it can be found in any food article that can come to your mind, from vegetables to fruits, to grains, to legumes. But the amount depends from food to food. Mostly carbohydrates are found in large amounts in grains. They are found in large amounts in grains, mostly the sugars and the starches. Fibers are found in large amounts, let's say in grains, in whole grains, and also vegetables and fruits. Sugars are also found in large amounts in certain fruits, not all fruits, but the sweet fruits. Those are some of the things that we'll look at. And so carbohydrates are sugars, starches, and fibers. But if we go a little bit deeper, we have two types of carbohydrates. There is complex carbohydrates and simple carbohydrates. So there are two types of carbohydrates. Types of carbohydrates. Types of carbs. And we'll know with time why it is very, very important for us to group carbohydrates venye tutazigroup leo. So we have simple carbohydrates. And we also have complex carbohydrates. We have simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. I believe that I'm still loud and clear, and we are together.
You are okay?
Yes, we are together.
Okay, thank you for the responses. So we have simple carbs and then complex carbohydrates. Simple carbs, they go too simple, the way the name suggests. And then complex carbs are also just complex as the way suggests. So complex carbohydrates are normally broken down to simple carbohydrates. And the simple carbohydrates are normally absorbed into the circulatory system in the body. We've talked about circulatory system before. So we have simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. So under simple carbohydrates, normally we have two major types under simple carbohydrates. We have monosaccharide, one sugar, monosaccharide, one sugar, and then disaccharide, which is simply means two sugars. So under simple carbohydrate, let me change my pen. I thank God I'm using PowerPoints today. I'm using Office. It's normally easy using Office. I I did the So we have under simple carbohydrates, we have mono carbohydrates. Mono means one. Saccharides essentially just means sugar. So under simple carbohydrates, we have monosaccharide, one sugar, and then disaccharide. Monosaccharides. Monosaccharide, two sugars. or 1 unit. Monosaccharide means 1 unit of sugar. Disaccharide means 2 units of sugar. And then under complex carbohydrates, what we have is, we know this is where we have fiber, complex. Fiber is not digestible. It's indigestible. It can't be broken down. And then we have starch. We have starch. Starch can be broken down. Starch is one of the ways plants store their carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates that are found in plants like cassava, plants like viazi, ama waru, they are called starch. Waru is a starchy, it's a starchy root tuber. And other root tubers ziko na starch. So starch inamaanisha tu the carbohydrate that is stored in plants, the carbohydrate that is stored in plants, the complex carbohydrate stored in plants. And then we have a complex carbohydrate called glycogen. Glycogen is the carbohydrate that is stored in our bodies, in human beings. So ukikula vitu kama nyama unapata glycogen. Ukikula vitu kama plants, you get starch. In our body, the starch or the simple and complex carbohydrates are normally stored in form of glycogen. Glycogen is a type of fat. Glycogen. So mostly it's stored in the liver. Fat is stored in the liver. Glycogen is stored in the liver and muscles. In the liver and muscles. I believe we are together up to that point. Is there something that I need to make clear as we proceed? Or any question on what we've discussed so far?
Excuse me, I'll ask
Yes.
you. Umesema starch is from animals and then glycogen from plants.
No. That's not what I've said. Starch is from plants. It's from plants. Glycogen in animals. So starch and glycogen is a form in which carbohydrates are stored. Starch and glycogen are forms in which carbohydrates are stored. And in plants, carbohydrates are stored as starch. In animals, carbohydrates are stored as glycogen. That's clear.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And I believe my right. And then we finally have polysaccharide. Poly means more than 2. Polysaccharide, more than 2 sugar units. Saccharide, as I said, inamaanisha tu sukari, something like that. So polysaccharide means more than 2 sugar units. So let me repeat as we proceed. We've said in this first slide, let me mute this person. There's someone who's on mute. Okay. She has muted herself. So we've said we'll be building on these things. So we've said that carbohydrates are essentially, they are sugars, starch, and fibers. Sugars, starch, and fibers. And the main function of carbohydrates in the human body is to provide energy, the energy that is normally used immediately. And the energy that we get from fats, mostly it is stored. Why? Why does the body prefer, siku moja nitauliza tu swali kama hiyo, why does the body prefer storing energy that we get from fats as opposed to storing the energy that we get from carbohydrates? The reason why the energy that we get from fats, the calories that we get from fats, are mostly stored in our body ni juu ziko less bulky. How are they less bulky? They do not absorb water. You know, when something absorbs water, its weight inaongezeka. So they are less bulky. That's number one. And they can easily be broken down. So the main reason one of the functions of fats in our body, carbs in our body, is it is used to provide energy. Provide energy. Mostly for immediate use. Provide energy for immediate use. I believe we are all together up to that point. So we have sugars, starch, and fibers. They make what is known as carbs. And these particular things, one of their functions, mostly the sugars and the starch, they provide energy. Fibers have other functions that we look at. An example to Leona, taking a diet that is full of vegetables and fruits inasaidia sana kulower the low density lipoprotein, which in which helps in reducing cholesterol as well in our body and strengthening heart health. So the types of carbohydrates, as you have said, there are two major types. Kuna simple carbohydrates, kuna complex carbohydrate. And under simple carbohydrate, there are different types. Kuna two. Kuna monosaccharide na disaccharide. Monosaccharide inamaanisha one sugar. Disaccharide simply means two sugars. And then we have complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are carbohydrates like fiber, carbohydrates like starch, carbohydrates like glycogen, and carbohydrates like polysaccharides. Those are complex carbohydrates. Let's proceed. So this is the carbohydrate map concept. If you are probably having difficulties seeing it, unaweza maximize your screen. Unaweza maximize your screen. So let's go through carbohydrates again. I'll draw a red line. You'll allow me draw a red line and to separate them into two. You said there are two types of carbohydrates. So I've drawn a red line. The top ones ni simple carbohydrate. The ones that are below the line ni complex carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates, tumesema kuna monosaccharides and disaccharides. So monosaccharides are essentially simple sugars that cannot be broken down during digestion. Like zimekuwa broken down mpaka zimefika mwisho, haziwezi kuwa broken down tena. So what is left of them is being absorbed into the body. We have glucose, we have fructose, and we have galactose. Those are some of the types of monosaccharides. So glucose essentially comes to us from grains. Glucose is a type of it's a type of carbohydrate that comes from grains. Fructose essentially comes to us mostly from fruits. Fructose, it's a type of carbohydrate that comes to us from fruits. So hizi vitu zote ni tamu. Glucose ni tamu, fructose ni tamu. Lakini the one that normally affects diabetes ni glucose. And so when we'll be talking about diabetes in the future, we'll be advising our diabetic patients to eat fruits, mbona, because fructose does not affect blood sugar levels kama the sugar that is called glucose. Fructose has to first go through your liver, and in the liver it is transformed into glucose for it to affect your blood sugar. So it takes a lot of time for your blood sugar levels to rise ukitumia fruits. So we have galactose. Someone is speaking. Is someone speaking, or should I mute them?
You can mute Irene.
Okay. Let me get back to Irene. Okay, muted. The recorded version will be shared for the sake of those who cannot hear, but I believe you guys can now hear me. What is the effect of fructose in the liver? Fructose is a good kind of sugar. It does not have any negative effect on the liver unless it is processed. Yeah, so let me proceed. So we have glucose from mostly our root tubers and grains, and then we have fructose mostly from our how can I put it, from our fructose from our fruits, and then we have galactose. Galactose mostly it's found you can find it in meat. You can find galactose is majorly found in animal products and in some vegetables and legumes. And then we have also something called galactose we have another one called lactose. Lactose is essentially just found in milk. And then we have disaccharides. Disaccharides are 2 units of sugars. And mostly disaccharides inakwanga a combination of 2 of the monosaccharides. An example, there's a disaccharide called sucrose. So sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose zikiwa combined. And then we have maltose. Maltose mostly need 2 units of glucose mbili. And then we have lactose, the one that is found in milk. Inapatikananga, it's glucose and galactose combined, glucose and galactose combined. So sucrose mostly is the sugar that we find in our table sugar. And it's normally the worst kind of sugar. I don't know why you guys keep unmuting. Am I audible? Am I boring?
You're audible.
Become difficult.
You're
Are
audible.
the terms making sense? Okay, thank you, David. And are the terms making sense?
Oh yes, they're making sense.
Okay. So we have glucose and fructose. Sucrose, we have 3 types of disaccharides. Kuna sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Maltose inaokaa naturally in starches, vitu kama waru, vitu kama cassava, vitu kama so kuna waru, kuna cassava ziko na maltose ama the starches. Your root tubers essentially. Root tubers ya mwaru, viazi vitamu, cassava, forgetting some, and the rest. And then lactose is the disaccharide that comes to us from milk. Essentially, it comes from milk. So those are the simple carbohydrates. Hizi zinakwanga absorbed directly into the system, mostly the monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are absorbed directly. Disaccharides, mostly they're broken down further into monosaccharides. Broken down. They have to be broken down into disaccharides. And then we have complex carbohydrates. And in complex carbohydrates, we saw 3. Tuliona starches, we saw fibers, and then we saw glycogen. An example, when we talk about starches ziko na more than 2 units of monosaccharides. And there are different types of starches. Kuna amylose, hizi hatutaangalia. Hizi kina amylose, amylopectin, we really won't look at them. So our study itaishia tu hapa starches. And then for fibers, we'll actually go deeper and we look at the soluble and the insoluble fibers. And so fibers, there are 2 types, soluble and insoluble. And then glycogen, as I said, this is mostly found in animal products, na zinakuwa stored in the liver and in the muscles. Is that clear up to that point? Can we proceed to the next slide?
Oh, yes.
Okay, let's proceed. So we've talked about the basics, carbohydrates in those slides to Nefita. And what are some of the sources of carbohydrates? What are some of the sources of carbohydrates? Carbohydrates in food. So the foods that have carbohydrates in a very greater degree, tuko na grains, tuko na vegetables, tuko na fruits, and then we have dairy. And most dietary sources of carbohydrates comes from starches. Things like beans, things like potatoes, and your grains. And as we said, plants store glucose in the form of starches. Glucose is stored in our body as in plants as starches. So I'd love to ask, what types of carbohydrates, from what we've seen in our initial slides, nataka kuziandika hapa, what types of carbohydrates do we find in grains? Someone? What types of carbohydrates are found in grains? Someone, what types can we tunaweza eka hata kwa chat box, what types of carbohydrates are found in grains?
Starches. Yes.
I would say fiber.
Who is saying fiber? Who said starches? So Kevin says fiber. Who says starches?
Mercy.
So so we have starch. We have fiber. What else? Yeah, it's true, Martinez, we have sugars, but you know that is sugar. Yeah, and in vegetables, someone? Without referring somewhere, just want to know if we've understood. Without referring to somewhere, how about vegetables? What kind of carbohydrates can we find in vegetables?
Both simple and complex carbohydrates. We talked about in the previous slide.
So someone says monosaccharides. Monosaccharides tuko na glucose, tuko na galactose, and we also have fructose. Those are monosaccharides. And Rema says both simple and complex. So in vegetables, essentially, what we find in large amounts is fiber. Mostly fiber. But in our root vegetables, let's say potatoes, we also have starches in them. We have some disaccharides as well in them and all that. How about fruits? What type of carbohydrate do we find in fruits? Without referring to someone?
Fructose.
Glucose.
Exactly, fructose. We don't find glucose in fruit. Fructose. We don't find glucose in fruits. We find fructose. And
Marcel
the
should
fructose
mute. Marcel
Yes?
should mute. Marcel to mute.
Oh, let me mute her. Okay, she has muted. So we have fructose, not glucose, in fruits. That's why it is safe for diabetic patients to eat vegetables and to eat fruits venye wanataka, but not grains. Grains, they should always go easy on them. We'll look into that time. And then we have dairy. Which we shouldn't even...
Lactose.
Yes? Lactose, thank you.
Lactose.
Exactly. Lactose. These are the kind of things that will come in our exam.
There are no fruits which have glucose.
Yeah, there are no fruits with glucose. I'm trying to mute a few people here and they're still unmuting themselves. And I don't want to mute everyone. And because I want us to have an interactive session, a session where you can easily unmute yourself and just speak. Yeah.
Is there another carbohydrate we get in dairy products apart from lactose?
Yeah, tell us. There are two. There are always two. Someone to tell us, aside from lactose, what else?
Glycogen?
Glycogen. No, glycogen is essentially just found in the liver and muscles.
Maltose.
Maltose? In dairy?
Galactose, mwalimu?
Galactose.
Yeah, probably also galactose in some. In a lesser degree, galactose, yes. Yeah. So let's proceed. You guys have always heard of, the war between white wheat flour and the brown wheat flour, ama chapo ya white na chapo ya brown. So today I want us to debunk, which one is safe between white rice and the brown rice. Which one really is safe, and which one should we eat as the people who are looking for health?
It's brown.
Brown rice.
Yes.
Brown rice.
I'm not getting you well, Gershon.
Brown rice.
Or the brown one.
Do you mean wheat?
So we want
do you mean wheat or rice?
Yes?
Do you mean wheat or rice?
Wheat. I've talked about wheat and rice. There is white chapati and brown chapati, and also there's white rice and the brown rice.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've talked about grains as a source of carbohydrate, and we can find fiber in grains. We can find starches in grains. But then there's something that arrests attention when it comes to grains. There are normally two types of grains. There's whole grain, and then there's also the processed grain. So a grain, essentially, it's normally just a seed or a kernel that is majorly made up of three components. We have the bran, we have the germ, and then we have the endosperm. In the endosperm, this is where our carbohydrate is. This is where the plant stores its sugars in form of starch. So the endosperm is the sweetest part of a grain. Juu hapo ndio kuna sukari, hapo ndio kuna carbohydrate, hapo ndio kuna starch. It is the sweetest part. And then we have other parts kama bran na germ. Endosperm, mostly it is white in nature. In refined grains, what normally happens is the bran is normally removed and also the germ is removed. So what are you left with? Endosperm. That is what is left, endosperm. Na endosperm tumeona kuna nini? Endosperm ni penye the grain stores its food in form of starch. This is where the grain stores its food in form of starch. So in the endosperm, you guys will give me a minute to share this link to with someone. And then we proceed. So in refined grains, what normally happens ni the bran, the germ is normally removed in the refinery processes in the factory, leaving us only with the starchy part of the grain. An example, white rice is just the starch of rice. Atuna bran, atuna germ. Let's proceed. So refined grains have been milled through a process that removes the germ and the bran. And you know, when the germ and the bran zikitolewa, unatoa fiber, unatoa iron, na unatoa B vitamins. Unabaki na nini? Unabaki na carbohydrates peke yake. So there are benefits essentially that comes with removing the grain, the germ and the bran. Number one, to increase the shelf life of these particular grains. Manufacturers normally resort to removing bran and germ. That's number one. Number two, it gives the grain a very fine texture. A texture in which inaweza absorb maji kwa urahisi, na hadi ukipika chapo inakuwa even tastier and softer, palatable, really friendly to your teeth and the stomach and the mouth. And then it's also a little cheap. Why? Juu haiharibiki haraka and such things. So these are some of the benefits of refining grains. Kwa hizi benefits nne, hakuna yenye inasaidia health hata moja. Hakuna a health ya benefit hapa hata moja. And unless you are probably seeing one. So every grain should be eaten with its fiber. If you don't eat a grain with its fiber, inamaanisha you can easily become constipated. So in constipated patients, what we'll always be advising them to do is to eat whole grains. Instead of eating white rice, tuna advise wakule brown rice. Why? Because brown rice has a lot of fiber, and with the fiber, they can easily relieve their fecal matter without any struggle at all. So in the endosperm, venye nimesema kuna kwanga tuna starch mostly peke yake. This is the anatomy of the seed. So in the bran, if the bran is removed, the bran is normally rich in B vitamins. And as we said, B vitamins are essential for your nerves. Kwa watu wenye wako na conditions kama pressure and diabetes, you really need a lot of these B vitamins and the trace minerals. If you remove bran, you are limiting yourself from taking the B vitamins. If you remove the germ, unaona unatoa mafuta nzuri, vitamin E oil, a very powerful antioxidant, vitamin E oil, which really greatly helps in cardiovascular health. And then we have healthy fats in the jam. We have B vitamins as well and nutrients. So in refinery process, tunaachiwa something that is not even that much healthy. That is the endosperm. It's normally not that healthy when eaten alone. It's just majorly carbohydrates and proteins. And so what does that mean? Inamaanisha, if you take a refined grain, you can easily overeat. Juu fibers that are in the bran inasaidianga tushibe haraka, overeat. So taking white rice inaweza fanya mtu overeat ama akule rice mingi na hata baada akose kushiba. Na ukikula rice mingi inamaanisha this particular glucose that you take itakuwa a lot in your system. The energy will be a lot in your system. Na tuliona when there's a lot of calories or energy in your system, the bad kind of fats was in increase. Triglyceride in the level in the blood in a shoot, the LDL in the blood in an increase and such things. So that's the danger. Those are some of the dangers of taking refined products. Those are some of the dangers of taking refined products. I'll give us a minute to look at this particular diagram and then we proceed. I'll be taking questions as we look at the diagram. If there's any question.
I have a question. I hope you...
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, so in regards to wheat,
yes,
could you talk about the amylopectin A in the wheat content, maybe refined and unrefined? What are the benefits or maybe the dangers of taking the refined one, the unrefined one, and especially or especially diabetic patients are always advised not to take refined, not even refined. I've heard of a patient being told to avoid wheat because of the amylopectin A, which is high in unrefined wheat than even the refined one. And so the person I had talking about this was somehow recommending the refined wheat over the unrefined one. So which is which?
Okay. We'll get there when we get there. Tukianza kuna slide hapa nilieka ya diabetes. We'll explain it here in this particular slide. I believe you can see it when we get there. And there are two reasons actually why diabetic patients should avoid wheat wholly. Any patient, mtu akiwa na any condition, any health problem, one of the things that they should wholly avoid is wheat. And there are several reasons, one of which it's hybridized. And by the fact that wheat imekuwa hybridized, the amylopectin A in it imekuwa interfered with. And so inamaanisha the glycemic index iko juu. We'll talk about glycemic index with time. What it is, glycemic index is the ability of the grain that you eat, the carbohydrate that you eat, the rate at which increase blood glucose inaitwa glycemic index, the rate at which it increases the blood glucose. So wheat ikiwa hata whole increase the blood glucose haraka sana kushinda hata the refined one. And diabetic patients should avoid high glycemic foods. Chakula zenye zinafanya sukari kwa damu zirise haraka sana in a very short period of time. Zinaitwa high glycemic foods. And brown wheat flour is a typical example of a high glycemic food. Iwe brown ama iwe white. Brown is higher than even the white one. So the other thing, there's a protein in wheat. Why am I forgetting the name of this protein?
Gluten.
Let me close my eyes tight and see if I'll remember. well, it has escaped. There's a type of protein in wheat. Na juu wheat imekuwa hybridized, this particular protein imekuwa interfered with, and so it affects several conditions, the cardiovascular ones, mostly. But we'll get there when we get there. We'll talk about it when we get there. Why am I forgetting this type of protein? Inaitwa. Okay.
Is it
I hope
gluten?
Is it? Oh yeah,
Gluten.
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 Yeah, gluten. Exactly, gluten. Yeah, that is it, gluten. Gluten is essentially found in almost every other seed, but it's very high in wheat, and by the fact that wheat is hybridized, it is higher in wheat and a little more poisonous compared to other products. So we'll proceed unless there are more questions.
Is 21 hours.
Okay, let's proceed. Let me mute. Is someone disturbing our peace? Let me mute him. Okay. So let's proceed. So let's look at the difference between refined and whole. In refined contains only the endosperm, and so tunaona the benefits are less. And in whole, it contains both the bran, germ, and endosperm. So it has more benefits than the refined one. In refined increases blood glucose response, which is very worse. Due an increase in blood glucose response inaweza fanya the pancreas cells they break down, which can easily result to diabetes. But in whole grains have complex carbohydrates with slower glucose response. Inamaanisha zinaingiza glucose polepole ndani ya damu in a way that the pancreas is not overwhelmed in responding to the increasing levels of glucose. I believe that's clear. Refined grains has low fiber. Refined grains have low fiber. Whole grains have high fiber. And if they have low fiber, inamaanisha it's not good for cardiovascular health, and it's also not good for diabetes. If it has high fiber, it's very good for your colon health. Some of the bacteria that are in your colon, the bacteria that are in your digestive system, huwa zinahitajingi fiber a lot for their survival. There are certain fibers that they normally feed on for their survival. So eating whole grains is more beneficial and healthy as compared to the refined ones. And we have refined grains have a lighter texture, and the whole grains they gonna a denser texture. So you can easily eat whole grain. You can easily eat whole grains without and na ukwe satisfied haraka without overeating on them. And then they're typically refined, ziko less expensive, whole ziko more expensive. You can actually see white rice and brown rice. Brown rice in a quality more expensive, mostly kwa supermarket, but ukinunua elsewhere utapata brown rice 1 kg ni around 180 shillings. If you look for them elsewhere, places kama Nyamakima in town, Nyamakima iko karibu na OTC, that's in Nairobi CBD. And then we have lower in nutrient density, very poisonous, lower in nutrients density. And then whole grains are high in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidant. Anything that is high in vitamins, minerals, and antioxidant are great for health. They're very good and beneficial for your health. Yes, Redempt. Yes, Redemptor, I see your microphone. I see you've raised your hand. Is there something that you want to raise, a question?
I'm sorry, I think it's by mistake.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So, know your whole grains. Know your whole grains. These are good. These are table that I placed here to just help us understand. And we are training to be wellness coaches, and wellness coaching and nutrition inaendanga hand in hand. So we have barley. You've probably heard of barley. I don't know, has any one of you ever cooked barley and eaten it? Personally, I have. I've even cooked chapos of barley. It smells and tastes nice. Okay, usipike chapo na barley, itavunjika though. It will be a little frustrating, so I wouldn't really advise someone to cook chapatis using barley. But you can cook barley, unaweza pikanga tu kama rice, ukule.
Question on that.
Yes?
Mwalimu, I have a
Yes.
question on that.
Yes.
I once worked in a brewing company, and I found that it was one of the ingredients for manufacturing beer.
Yes, it is.
So is it healthy to be eaten? I thought it was only for manufacturing beer.
That's what we've actually been made to believe. Barley is only used to manufacture beer and the likes of Chang'e and all that. But it's a plant that, God spoke and it existed. And it's a plant. Unajua beer, the only problem with beer is the alcohol in it. The problem is the fermentation. So if you cook your barley na ijakuwa fermented, it means it doesn't have alcohol within it and there's no problem eating it.
Okay.
Even corn, there are people who make beer using not really beer, but brews kama changa using maize. Mostly they normally wanachanga hadi ioze. I really don't know if I'm misinformed ama inakwanga hivyo. But it doesn't mean that maize is bad. We can eat maize provided we prepare it in a nice way that ensures that it's not fermented. So barley is good. So characteristics of barley, it is high in fiber with a tough hull. Hull inakwanga the
Ngozi. We can't hear you.
So
We can't hear you, teacher.
You're breaking, Mwalimu. I can't hear nothing.
Mwalimu, your signal is not clear. We cannot hear you.
Maybe Kevin can reach out to him ajue nini iko shida.
Hata slide zimepotea.
Oh, let me reach him then.
You're on. Well, we can't hear our teacher. I don't know what triggered all this, but I think let's give it a time a bit.
Well,
Shortly,
the
I'm
slide
calling.
is back, but yeah.
He is back.
The slide.
The slide is
The-
back. Oh.
The slide is back. Okay. At what point did you guys lose me? I had someone say that I'm breaking. Nika realize my
When we were
network.
talking about barley,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
you were stating that if it is used well, it can
Yeah.
serve as well the same way people are abusing corn, making beer busa.
Yeah, exactly. And so we it's like I'm connected in two devices. Okudo. Umeingia na two devices. Allow me mute you. Okay. So we have buckwheat. Buckwheat is also a nice one. When it is whole, it is normally very high in antioxidant. So it's a very good grain in cases of cardiovascular health and cancers due to the antioxidant levels in it. And then we have corn. Corn is normally very sweet. Corn ni maize. And then we have oats. You've probably heard of oats. You've heard of probably oat porridge. Na vitu kama hizo. Oats is one of the carbohydrates that when we'll be talking about gaining weight na vitu kama hizo, oats is one of the herbs that we'll be using to make milk for weight gain. Tukiwa na practical classes on cooking. So we have high, oats are normally very high in protein. It's a carbohydrate, yes, but it also has protein as well. And this is one of the carbohydrates that we highly recommend for in cases of cancer, mostly in when we treat cancer patients. For the first 3 months, we go easy on the carbohydrates that we give them, because cancer normally feeds on glucose, essentially glucose. And cancer cells normally need glucose, yes, but cancer cells normally feed on glucose 3 times more than the normal cells. 3 times more than the normal cells. Let me see if I'm still recording. I might be here and the recording is not happening. Okay, so let's proceed. So we have quinoa. Quinoa is a very good one for diabetic patients. You can have a very low glycemic index. I believe mnaelewa glycemic index ni nini because we've looked at it. And then we have rice, we have rye, we have wheat. So to know, whole rice wa wanaandikanga brown rice. For quinoa mostly nakuanga tu whole. So hizi ni slides mnaweza soma, the health benefits ziko hapo kando, how you can know whether these particular grains are whole or not. Ziko tu hapo kando. So I'll just go to the next slide due to time. So some of the advantages of taking whole grains ni number 1, it has a lot of fiber. And then number 2, it is dense in nutrients. This is what you need. This is what your stomach really needs. Nutrient dense. So it contains minerals. When do we get the notes and slides? Okay. Let me share with you guys the slides tonight. That means I'll sleep a little late. Let me share them with you before some minutes after our class. I'll share them. So they're normally nutrient dense. They contain minerals, trace minerals. Tutaangalia minerals and the trace minerals na vitamins in depthly venye tumeona lipids na carbohydrates. And then you have carotenoids. Carotenoid ni precursor ya vitamin A. The vitamin A that is found in plants. And then you have phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are plant chemicals, things like flavonoids, things like tannins, those are phytochemicals. So let's see the digestion of fats. Is there any question up to that point? Hapa nimepita raka juu nilishaipitia. Okay, these slides need a little editing. And that's why I'm saying I'll sleep a little late if I'm to send them tonight. There are a few things that I really need to add up and here. At least when someone reads them alone, on their end, they make sense. So let's talk about the digestion and absorption of fats. So in your mouth, that's where digestion begins. And in the mouth, there are a few things, there are a few carbohydrates that are digested. An example, the starch in your mouth, I believe that I'm still audible. Am I still audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in the mouth, I believe Munona the slides. I'll just read most of the things that ziko kwa hii slide and then just explain. So in the mouth, there is what is known as starch that is broken down to maltose by a juice called salivary amylase. Si lazima ujue salivary amylase, provided you know that the breakdown of starch inaanza kwa mdomo na kuna vitu kama maltose, and maltose tuliona it's 2 units of glucose. So maltose is broken down to glucose in the mouth. And in the mouth, there is also mechanical digestion of carbohydrates. So there are two things that happens in the mouth. There's the chemical digestion of carbohydrates, and also mechanical. Mechanical inamaanisha there are no juices that are involved in it. There are no juices. Chemical inamaanisha there are digestive juices that are involved in its digestion. So in chemical digestion of carbohydrate in the mouth, what happens is the starch called maltose inakuwa broken down into glucose kwa mdomo, and some of the glucose in the mouth inaweza kuwa absorbed into the blood tu kwa mdomo, but absorption majorly inafanyika in the ileum, in the duodenum na the jejunum, the upper parts of your small intestines. So in the stomach, mostly this particular juice yenye inaitwa salivary amylase, its function inakuwa inactivated juu ya acid. This juice iangalie tu kama probably an insect, kama what type of insect? An ant that breaks down breadcrumbs into small crumbs. So that is what salivary amylase is. It's an enzyme, it's a juice, and ina break the breadcrumbs, the carbohydrates, into smaller pieces. Alafu in the stomach, its activity inakuwa inactivated juu normally it functions best in a basic environment, lakini kwa tumbo, the stomach is normally acidic in nature. So salivary amylase does not continue its digestion. So essentially, digestion of carbohydrate in the stomach normally stops. There's no digestion of carbohydrates in the stomach. The body picks carbohydrate digestion in the small intestine, where maltose is further broken down and other carbohydrates are further broken down and absorbed into the system. So there are a few things that plays a role in digestion. An example, pancreas, there's an enzyme called amylase that is secreted by the pancreas for the breakdown of starch into maltose. Inakuwa deposited into the duodenum. Duodenum is the upper part of your small intestine, the part that connects your small intestine to the stomach, inaitwa duodenum. We'll look into it tukiendelea na our classes za anatomy. As we said in our last duodenum. So kuna small intestines, and in the small intestines, the enzyme amylase inaekwa to break down disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, maltose, monosaccharide. Ina depend umekula nini. So let's say umekula some home-baked bread. Home-baked bread, we'll know how to bake. We'll do baking practically. Home-baked bread. After our nutrition classes, these are some of the fun things that we'll be doing. So home-baked bread. And in your baking, let's say you've used wheat, whole wheat to bake. Whole wheat. So nataka tu tuone digestion ya hizi vitu. Whole wheat. Umetumia whole wheat to bake, and umeka sukari nguru. Let's say umetumia honey. I normally use honey in my bakings. Honey ama sukari nguru. Sukari nguru ni jaggery. You can also use sukari nguru or honey or whatever you want. And then umeka other things. I don't want to talk about the other things. Let's talk about the carbohydrates that might be here. Let's say umeka apple sauce. So this is homemade apple sauce. Umejitengenezea apple sauce, homemade apple sauce. Apple sauce ni apples too. Ni apples too in an essence. So these are carbohydrates ndio nimetaja hapa, and these are some of the things that you can actually then use to bake whole bread at home, instead of eating the breads that we find from the supermarket that are really not that healthy. They're not friendly to our body. They're only friendly to the pockets of the people who make them. So we have whole wheat. Whole wheat iko na carbohydrates. Which kinds of carbohydrates? Let's say starch. Let me use a different pen. I normally feel happy nikiwa nafanya presentations kutumia PowerPoint because of the writing. We have starch. Whole wheat iko na starch. Let's say maltose. And then honey iko na a simple. Honey inakuanga na simple it's a simple sugar. Honey is a simple sugar na inakuanga glucose. Is it glucose or fructose? Which kind of sugar inakuanga in honey? Anyone who knows the type of carbohydrate in honey? The honey that is made by bees. Anyone? It's a simple carbohydrate. Which one?
Glucose.
Glucose.
I mean sucrose.
Sucrose.
Fructose.
Who said sucrose?
It's monosaccharide.
It's fructose and glucose.
Yeah?
Fructose and glucose.
So the guy who said
it is
someone is
monosaccharide.
saying monosaccharide. Monosaccharide.
Yes.
It's a simple inakwanga a simple sugar. Let's go with sucrose. The bees normally source the nectar from flowers, na flowers inakwanga mostly na glucose, inakwanga na glucose and what else? Glucose and fructose. So it's a simple sugar, either way. Simple sugar. That's why diabetic patients hawafai kutumia. And anything that diabetic patients hawafai kutumia inakwanga na glucose. So sucrose inakwanga made up of glucose plus fructose. And then applesauce, which type of sugar is in applesauce? Applesauce ni apples tu zenye zimekuwa blended alafu zikakuwa heated kidogo. Yes?
Fructose.
Yeah, fructose. Thank you. So fructose. So let's say you your supper inafaa ikuwe a very light meal. So in your supper you have quite baked bread. Someone should unmute. Someone should mute. Gashon. Okudo. Yes, nimekumute Okudo. You are speaking. Nasema mwalimu, you can unmute and yes.
Yes. I want to ask you a question concerning Skaringuru.
Yes.
Is it safe to eat it?
Very safe, very healthy, provided you eat it in the right amount. Yeah.
Can I use it in porridge?
Yes?
So can I use it while making porridge?
Yes.
Instead of normal sugar?
Yeah, instead of normal sugar. That's the healthiest kind. Na inakwanga tu sucrose pia.
Sawa.
So let's proceed. I want us to trace the digestion of this bread. So nitawauliza tu hizi swali one of the days. So in after work in the evening, you feel slightly tired, and so you decide to bake some bread to take with some leguminous milk, soya milk, or probably a fruit milk kama coconut milk or whatever. So you prepare some coconut milk and some home-baked, some lovely, nice, sweet-smelling home-baked bread. You decide to sit down in your dining table, in the dining room. Na uanze kukula. How will this food be digested from the mouth all the way mpaka ipite in the anal area? So this particular food ikiingia kwa mdomo, juu whole wheat iko na starch, na hii starch ni maltose. The maltose itakuwa broken down by an enzyme yenye iko kwa saliva inaitwa salivary amylase. So hii maltose itakuwa broken down into what? Two glucoses. Sucrose pia itakuwa broken down to glucose and fructose. And at times, not all the starch inaweza kuwa broken down chemically kwa mdomo. Kuna zenye zitafika in the small intestines without being broken down. And so there is amylase that is produced by the pancreas that further on breaks down this bread, the maltose that is in this bread. You know, the sucrose, the amylose that is in this bread. It breaks it down further. Why? We need these particular carbohydrates in these particular foods to be broken down to monosaccharides. And what are these monosaccharides? Tuko na glucose, tuko na fructose, na tuko na glucose, fructose, and galactose. Zinafaa zikuwe broken down into those three. Ndio zikuwe absorbed into the system. So God decided that these things should always be broken down in that way. So for carbohydrates zinakuwa broken down kwa mdomo na in the small intestine, the upper parts of the small intestine. And then after they've been broken down, they'll be absorbed into the body. So hii chakula yote yenye tumetaja hapa, the whole grain, the honey, the apple sauce, zimekuwa broken down into glucose. I'll write on the left side of your of your screen. Let me use green. Imekuwa broken down into glucose, glucose, fructose. That's all that we need. The fiber will also still be there. The fiber itakuwa tu intact. Fiber, glucose, fructose, juu fiber ikui digestible. And then we have easy azina galactose. Alafu tuko na galactose. So hii chakula imekuwa broken down into these four. And then after being broken down into these four, zinakuwa absorbed. And in the liver, the glucose is stored as glycogen. This glucose in the liver will be stored as glycogen. In your muscles, itakuwa stored as glycogen as well. And then the fructose in the liver will be done what? Will be transformed into glucose. When it is transformed into glucose, it can be stored in the liver as glycogen and also in your muscles as glycogen. That's what happens. So in the small intestines, zinakuwa absorbed into the hepatic portal system. Tutaona what the hepatic portal system is. Zinakuwa absorbed into your blood, into the blood, into the arteries that takes them to the liver. Everything is normally absorbed into the blood and then taken to the liver. Everything we eat is first passes through the liver, aside from fats. Fats ndio hazipitii liver. Fats zinaingianga kwa the lymphatic system kwanza, and then after the lymphatic system, that's when they get back to the liver and all that. A little bit, we'll look into that. So that's what happens. And in the large intestine, what gets to the large intestine is the fiber. This guy here, this first guy in our list, that's what gets into the large intestine. So soluble fiber is fermented into various acids and gases by the bacteria in large amounts. Those are the soluble fibers. The insoluble fibers add to the weight of your fecal matter. They absorb water and they make your bowel movements a little bit more easy. And then they'll be passed or they'll be excreted through the rectum and the anal area. That's how the food is digested. You're swallowing it always. Is there any question here on what we've discussed on digestion? Is there a question? I want to stop. Nataka niachie hapo. Okay, I think I should. This is the last slide. Acha nimalize ndio kesho tusianze so that tomorrow we go a little deep. Is there any question?
Mwalimu, can I ask a question?
Hakuna swali.
Please, a swali.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask you when you are introducing how the digestive process is taking place when somebody has taken a whole grain bread.
Yes.
And maybe the milk from the coconut.
Yes.
You talk digestion of the bread alone, but what about the coconut milk? Does it undergo the same process?
Yes, it undergoes the same process. My focus was on the bread because bread ndio iko na mostly the carbohydrates that we yeah. Coconut milk iko na majorly oil na proteins.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I was just focusing on the carbohydrates. So let's proceed. This is our last slide.
Niko na swali.
Yes. This is the
Winnie. Unapata sometimes mtu ameenda event na kuna chakula mingi, so unapata mtu ameweka different kinds of proteins, ameweka fish, ameweka nyama, ameweka kuku, alafu amekuja hapo akaweka minji, then amechukua mchele na ugali na mboga na anazikula pamoja na kamelo ama na machungwa. Hizi zote zinakuwa digested aje at the same time?
Okay. Well, so there's a time we were having some medical camps at some village in Kiserian. Tulikuwa tumepartner na some guys in South Korea. And tulikuwa they were spending their nights at AUA, the Adventist University of Africa. That's where they had their offices and stuff. So these South Koreans, they ate their food, their South Korean foods, the seafoods, and everything. Wenye wanakulanga kama watu wa Chinese. And also us Africans pia tulikuwa na two side yetu and the foods and everything. So ilikuanga self-service. Ilikuwa buffet. So there are some funny individuals who would serve chakula zote zenye ziko kwa buffet ya South Koreans na the African ones as well. Kila kitu. And you really wonder how these foods are going to be digested zote. So we'll talk about something called food combination, and we'll be able to understand that proteins should not be combined. Like you shouldn't combine proteins with other proteins. Kuna wenye wanapendanga kupika minji pengine na nyama. That's poor protein combination. Proteins unafaa ukule peke yake hivyo in a meal. We'll understand food combinations, and then what we will also see, someone is unmuted. What we'll also see, you should not take more than 3 varieties of food at a meal. Mostly your cooked foods. Haufai kukula more than 3 varieties. So kama ni rice, beans na vegetables, better, hiyo imetosha. More than 3 inakuwa sasa health deform, and you'll be interfering with your digestive system, confusing the enzymes and just eroding the protective mucus lining in your digestive system and all that. So we'll look at these particular principles as a food combination, and one of them, venye nimesema, proteins should not be mixed with other proteins. Minji haifai kuwa mixed na beans, juu zote ni protein. It's either ukule minji ama beans peke yake, ama mix minji na waru. That's better. Juu minji majorly ni proteins, waru majorly ni carbohydrates. Na ukikula na some rice, brown rice ni sawa. Carbohydrates na carbohydrates zinaweza kuwa mixed together, ainanga shida. Yeah. So we'll talk about that, Winnie, don't worry.
Thanks.
Okay. So this person of ours ashakula na already, let's say, hii wheat ilikuwa na glucose mingi sana. So the glucose gets into the blood. I believe you can see the vessels and you can also see the organs. The organs hapa tunaona intestines. Let me see if my laser itaonekana vizuri. Let me use a laser. Yep. So this is one of the organs. I believe unaona penye laser, the laser is jumping. I'm dancing the mouse. So this is one of the organs. This is the intestine. Tuna the small intestine. The small intestine is the one that is in purple. I believe this is purple. And then this one is the large intestine. Penye the laser inakimbia, the blue one is the large intestine. So this is the first organ. And this is where absorption happens. So in the small intestine, angalia number 1. So glucose inakuwa absorbed. Just look at the laser venye inaenda. Glucose inakuwa absorbed into your blood vessel. So this is the blood vessel. Glucose ishaingia in the blood vessel. From where? From your intestines. So the balls zenye ziko in blue ni glucose. So the more the glucose gets into the blood vessels, the more the amount of glucose in the blood vessels increase. So that's number 1. Huyo mtu amekula na glucose inaendelea increase ndani ya damu. So what happens is this organ here, the one that the laser saizi sasa inacheza juu yake, this organ is called the pancreas. And the pancreas normally releases 2 types of hormones. Number 1 is insulin. Let me just draw a circle on top of number 1. Number 1 is insulin. Okay, yellow ni kama ionekani. Let me use a different color. Yeah, let me use red. Number 1 is insulin. I believe mnaona penye nimemark red. And then number 2 ni glucagon. But let's focus on number 1, insulin. So insulin inakuwa released from the liver as blood glucose, as the glucose in the blood tends to increase. So insulin inakuwa released into the circulatory, into your blood, ndio ifungue cells zenye ziko kwa muscles. I believe you can see the muscle. And then cells zenye ziko kwa liver. I also believe you can see the liver, so that the glucose, the balls in blue, can get into the liver and into the muscles, so that they can be utilized for energy ama zikuwe stored. So that's what happens. That's how glucose is. So there are times when the glucose levels zenye ziko kwa damu, mostly when someone is fasting. When someone is fasting, that's the period between your last meal and your next meal. That period is normally called fasting, ama ile fasting ya kusema leo the whole day sitaki kukula. So when someone is fasting and probably they're doing some kind of work, blood glucose ina reduce kwa damu. So what the pancreas does, glucagon, the hormone, is released into the blood. Look at the green arrow. The glucagon number 5, the green arrow number 5, glucagon is released into the blood. It goes to the liver, and in the liver, the glucagon stimulates the breakdown of glycogen. Si tuliona glucose inakuwa stored kama glycogen kwa liver. So glucagon inafanya the glycogen ikuwe broken down into glucose, alafu irudi back into circulation, so that the body can use it. Are we clear up to that point? Is it making sense? Is what I've said making sense? A bit. Nice. A bit. To someone who is probably hearing this for the first time, it might be making sense a bit. If at all I'm a good teacher, it will make sense a bit. And the second time I explain it will now make perfect sense. So I want to explain it again to someone who didn't understand me well. And we now want to use this slide. As you see, niliweka blank slide hapa ya explain tena. So tumeona, let me use a pen. Tumeona kuna, we have your blood vessels. We have the blood vessel. We have your vessel. So what happens ni your small intestine, kuna small intestine hapa. Si tumeona the bread that you made yourself at home, that you baked yourself, imekuwa broken down in the small intestine to glucose. Sindio? And then the glucose is absorbed, is taken into your blood. So the more the glucose, the more am I audible? The more
Yes,
the glucose, thank you. Nice. So the more the glucose, the higher. The more the glucose gets into your blood vessels, the higher the levels of glucose rise. The more the levels of glucose rise. So glucose inaingia kwa damu na inaendelea kurise. So hii glucose inafaa ikuwe na in your body inafaa ikuwe between 3.9 what's normally the units? Is it millimole? Millimole per, is it deciliter? But the unit C must not with you. Okay, you should know them. You depend na the equipment unatumia kumesha. But 3.9 millimole per deciliter to 5.6. So these are the normal levels za glucose kwa damu. So let's say glucose inaendelea kurise na ikue let's say 7.8 millimole. Ikiwa above 5.6, what happens is the organ called the pancreas in your blood, in your system, in your body. Let me use a different kind of pen to draw the pancreas. So the organ called the pancreas, tumesema glucose levels zimepanda juu ulikula wheat mingi. Ni sawa zikipanda after the meal, it's totally okay zikipanda, provided inapanda pole pole in a way that pancreas haishtuliwi abruptly kutoa insulin. So the pancreas will release insulin into the blood, release insulin. And this insulin is released into the blood mbona your glucose levels are above the normal levels. So when insulin is released into the blood, what happens? Let me use green to draw glucose. What happens ni the glucose that is in the blood inatoka ndani ya damu ndio zirudi back into normal levels. So insulin inamaanisha glucose imetoka ndani ya damu ikaingia kwa cells. Insulin inasaidia tu glucose zingie ndani ya cells, either the liver cells za liver, ama your muscle cells, na your skeletal cells za bones. Skeletal cells. That's where the glucose go to the cells. So glucose zikiwa 7.8 above 5.6, the pancreas releases insulin into your blood, and the insulin inafungua mlango za hizi cells tuliziita viwanda. Inafungua mlango ya hizi viwanda for the raw material called glucose to get into them so that the raw material can be used effectively ama ikuwe tu stored for further use. That's what happened when glucose levels rise. When glucose levels go below 3.9, what happens is the pancreas, let me use a different pen. Okudo, what's your favorite color?
My favorite. It's blue.
It's blue. Let me use blue. So when there are low levels of glucose in your blood, the pancreas ita release nini? Ita release kenye inaitwa glucagon. So glucagon ina stimulate the liver so that the glucose that was stored in the liver irudishwe ndani ya damu. That's what happened. So in diabetic patients, in diabetes, what happens is, mostly in type 2, what happens ni the insulin kifunguo, the key called insulin haziko enough, hazikui produced enough, and so very few doors are being opened for the glucose to get into the cells, very few doors. And so the amount of glucose in your blood zitakuwa high consistently. Why? Jumlango hazifunguliwi sana mingi, so glucose itabaki tu hapo. That's number one. So si tunajua in diabetes, blood glucose levels huwa zinakuanga juu. So if the insulin is not being released enough of them, enough amounts, then blood sugar levels will always tend to rise. And then number two, these cells can reject the insulin that is released. I believe I'm still audible. These cells can reject the insulin that is being released. Tunasemanga insulin sensitivity. The cells are insensitive to the insulin sensitivity. Alafu not enough insulin sensitivity or not enough. So the cells, how do they reject? As we have said, insulin ni kama key yenye inafungua mlango. So hizi keys zinakataa kufanya kazi. They're being released enough, yes, but zinakataa kufungua mlango. Why? Probably there's a lot of parts around the cells zenye zinazuia the keys kuingia and all that. So that's what happens in diabetes. And that's why in diabetic patients, there's normally continuous glucose inakwanga always on the rise. And we'll see how we can actually help or rather ensure that the glucose levels, the insulin that is released zikuwe accepted na the cells. When someone has type 2 diabetes, tutaona. So that's essentially what diabetes is, how these things happen. So if we take whole grains, as we said, unaona hii glucose yenye inaingia kwa your blood vessels zitakuwa zinaingia pole pole juu fiber ina regulate the uptake of glucose into your blood into the blood vessels, zina regulate. That's why in diabetic patients, it's normally advised that they should take brown rice brown wheat flour, though in our diabetic patients hatutakuwa tuna advise wachukue wheat, but for rice they can take the brown rice. We'll be able to understand when we'll talk about diabetes. So that's just essentially it, and we'll talk more. So hiyo tumeona carbohydrates, everything about carbohydrates, venye inakuwa digested, venye ina affect blood glucose levels, venye inakuwa stored and everything. That's just the basic things that we can, that's the most basic thing, the most basic things we can say about carbohydrates. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? So tomorrow we'll go through these slides. We'll just repeat a few things. We'll see how we can read labels. So tomorrow we'll go through these slides. Tutakuwa tunarudia a few things here. And then we'll call it a class on carbohydrates. Yeah.
Sawa.
So miacha nimalize kurecord. Record. Yes.
How will we get this this slide? Can we get them online tomorrow?
The slides ni zenu mtazipata as soon as possible, tonight or tomorrow.
Thank you.
So I think we can pray to end our session. Sijui tuliomba kweli tukianza. I think we can pray to end our session.
Yes.
I'll invite a volunteer.